Have you ever had your own father look you in the eye and declare you a liability? I walked out into the snow pregnant, leaving behind a gift box strong enough to destroy his honor. But real revenge arrived 7 years later with a signature and interest rates. I even bought the debt of the lawyer who thought he was untouchable. Before we start, comment where you are listening from since I want to see how far this storm reaches. My name is Mackenzie Black, and I was standing in the middle of a dining room that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime when my life officially ended. Or at least, the version of my life that involved being a daughter. The air in the room was stale, recycled, and smelled faintly of roasted lamb and expensive red wine. We were in Briar Ridge, Colorado, a place where the driveways were heated to melt the snow before it could touch the tires of the luxury SUVs, and the neighbors were far enough away that no one could hear you scream. The silence in the room was heavy, the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. My father, Howard Blackwell, sat at the head of the mahogany table. He did not look like a father. He looked like a chairman of the board presiding over a hostile takeover. He was wearing a charcoal suit, the tie loosened just enough to suggest he had had a long day of being important, but not enough to look sloppy. He stared at me, his eyes devoid of any warmth, any recognition of the history we shared. He looked at my stomach, visibly swollen under my sweater, and his lip curled in disgust. He did not ask if I was healthy. He did not ask who the father was. He did not ask if I was scared. To him, the life growing inside me was not a grandchild. It was a defect, a manufacturing error in the Blackwell product line. He slammed his hand down on the table. The crystal wine glasses jumped, a sharp, terrified chime that rang through the high-ceilinged room. You are a liability. The words hung in the air, vibrating with violence. He did not shout it like a man losing control. He gnarled it out, low and dangerous, like a verdict. He stood up, towering over the centerpiece of winter flowers. I have spent 20 years building this name, he said, his voice shaking with a suppressed rage that was far more terrifying than screaming. Blackwell Crown Development is a standard. It is a brand. And you are walking around with a billboard advertising bad judgment. He pointed a finger at me, a finger that wore a platinum ring. I am cutting you out. Mackenzie, as of this moment, you are out of the house. You are out of the will. You are out of the trust. I will not have my legacy diluted by your reckless incompetence. I stood there, my hands resting instinctively on my belly. The baby kicked, a small flutter against my palm, oblivious to the fact that her grandfather had just categorized her as a sunk cost. Beside him, my stepmother, Marla, took a sip of her wine. She didn't look at me. She looked at the reflection of the chandelier in the window, a small, tight smile playing on her lips. She had been waiting for this moment for 15 years. She had always viewed me as an obstacle, a remnant of a previous administration she wanted to phase out. Now, Howard was doing the paperwork for her. I felt a coldness spread through my chest. But it wasn't fear. It was clarity. For years, I had tried to be the daughter he wanted. I had studied finance. I had dressed the part. I had kept my voice low and my grades high. But it was never about who I was. It was about what I was worth to him. And right now, my valuation had hit 0. I did not cry. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. If he wanted to treat this like a business transaction, I would speak the language. I slowly bent down. The movement was difficult. My center of gravity shifted by the pregnancy, but I kept my back straight. I reached under my chair and pulled out a small, black gift box. It was elegant, wrapped with a silver ribbon, the kind of box that usually holds a diamond necklace or a watch. I had prepared it 3 days ago. I had known this dinner was coming. I had known the tone he would take, though perhaps not the finality of it. I walked around the side of the table. The sound of my boots on the hardwood floor was the only noise in the room. I stopped right next to him. I didn't hand it to him. I placed it gently on the table, right next to his untouched plate of lamb. "What is this?" he asked, looking at the box with suspicion, as if it might explode. "Open it." I said. My voice was steady. It surprised even me. He scoffed. A short, dismissive sound. I am not interested in your sentimental apologies. Mackenzie, you cannot buy your way back into this family with a trinket. It is not an apology, I said. He glared at me, then snatched the box up. He ripped the ribbon off with a violent jerk and opened the lid. He expected jewelry, maybe a locket with a picture of us from better times, a desperate plea for nostalgia. Instead, he pulled out a single sheet of paper. Folded in thirds, he unfolded it. I watched his eyes scan the document. It was a formal notice of overdue debt from a commercial lender. Attached to a copy of a personal guarantee, the amount was substantial, $250,000. Defaulted on 6 months ago, accumulating interest at a penalty rate that was criminal, but that wasn't the part that mattered. Look at the signature. Howard, I said softly. He froze. His eyes locked on the bottom of the page. There, in blue ink, was the name Mackenzie Black. The loops were perfect. The slant was identical to the way I signed my driver's license. It was a masterpiece of forgery. It was a signature that looked like mine, felt like mine, but I had never held the pen. I found that in the mail pile you thought you had intercepted. I said, you took out a commercial bridge loan for the West River project. You didn't want to leverage your own assets, so you used my credit profile. You used my identity as the guarantor. You leveraged your daughter because you didn't want to risk your boat. Marla set her wineglass down. The sound was sharp against the granite coaster. She looked at the paper, then at me, her eyes narrowing. She didn't look shocked by the fraud. She looked annoyed that I had found it. You are being dramatic, Marla said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. It is a family business. Mackenzie, we all share the risk. You should be honored your father trusts your name enough to use it. You are destroying the family brand over a piece of paper. Howard crumpled the paper in his fist. He didn't deny it. He didn't look ashamed. He looked angry that he had been caught, not by the law, but by the liability standing in his dining room. You live under my roof, Howard roared, throwing the crumpled paper back at me. It hit my chest and fell to the floor. You eat my food. I gave you everything if I need to use a clean credit line to keep the company liquid. That is my right. You are my property. Mackenzie, you don't get to audit me. The word property hung there, ugly and naked. That was it. The final severance. He didn't see a person. He saw an asset class, and a depreciating one at that. I looked at the crumpled paper on the floor. That document was illegal. It was identity theft. It was fraud. In any other context, he would be in handcuffs. But here, in this fortress of wealth, he believed he was the law. I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt too thin, as if he had sucked all the oxygen out for himself. I looked him in the eye. For the first time in my life, I didn't see my dad. I saw a man who was over-leveraged and morally bankrupt. I will not argue, I said. My voice was quiet, barely a whisper, but it cut through the room like a razor. I will audit? Howard laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. You will audit. You have nothing. You are nothing. Get out of my house. Get out before I have security. Throw you into the snow. I turned my back on him. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every instinct in me wanted to scream, to beg, to ask why I wasn't enough, but I swallowed it down. I turned my back on the warmth, on the money, on the only home I had ever known. I walked toward the foyer. I grabbed my coat from the rack. It was a thin wool coat, stylish but not designed for the blizzard raging outside. I didn't have time to pack a bag. I didn't have time to grab my charger or my savings bonds. I just had the clothes on my back and the baby in my belly. As I opened the heavy oak front door, the wind hit me. It was brutal. The cold bit into my skin instantly, shocking my system. Snow swirled into the grand hallway, melting on the expensive marble, behind me. I heard Howard's voice one last time. He was shouting to Marla, loud enough for me to hear. Let her go. She will be back in a week, begging for a check. She is a bad investment. She is a liability. I stepped out and closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking shut was final. The warmth was gone. The light was gone. I was standing in the dark, the snow whipping against my face. Turning my eyelashes into ice, I walked down the long driveway. My boots crunched on the frozen gravel. I was shivering, my teeth chattering uncontrollably, but my mind was burning hot. He thought he had won. He thought he had discarded a broken piece of inventory. He thought that by stripping me of my inheritance and my home, he had rendered me powerless. He was wrong. I stopped at the end of the driveway, looking back at the house. It glowed like a castle on the hill, golden and impenetrable, but I knew the cracks in the foundation. I knew about the bridge loans. I knew about the personal guarantees. I knew about the desperate shuffling of funds between accounts to hide the losses. He called me a liability. I wrapped my arms around my stomach, protecting the only thing that mattered. If he wants to see me as a debt, I whispered to the empty, freezing night, then I will learn how to be the creditor. I turned away from the house and began the long walk toward the main road. The snow was deepening, making every step a struggle. I didn't know where I would sleep. I didn't know how I would feed the baby. I didn't know if I would survive the night. But as I walked into the darkness, leaving the golden cage behind, I made a promise. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to collect every single cent, with interest. The rejection did not come with a scream like my father's had. It came with the quiet, rhythmic whir of a dot matrix printer in a leasing office that smelled like cheap carpet cleaner. The leasing agent, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read, Brenda, slid my application back across the glass desk. She did not look at me. She looked at a point somewhere over my left shoulder, avoiding the visual reality of my 6-month pregnant stomach. We cannot approve the lease. Ms. Black. I sat straighter in the plastic chair. I placed a thick white envelope on the desk. Inside was $3,000 in cash. It was nearly everything I had left from the jewelry I had pawned 2 towns over. I have the money. I said, that is first month, last month, and a security deposit. I can put down another $500 for a damage waiver. I am quiet. I do not have pets. Brenda sighed and tapped her fingernail on the paper she had printed out. It is not about the cash. Honey, it is the score. We have a corporate policy. We cannot lease to anyone with a credit score under 600. And yours? She turned the paper around so I could see the number. It was bold and black. 520. It was a number that belonged to a deadbeat, a gambler, a thief. It was not my number, but according to the 3 major credit bureaus, it was exactly who I was. I see a foreclosure started on a commercial property in Denver 3 weeks ago, Brenda said, her voice dropping to a whisper as if she were diagnosing a terminal illness. And there are 3 charge-offs from credit lines totaling nearly $40,000. You are a liability. Ms. Black, the system flags you as high risk for non-payment. There was that word again, liability. It was following me like a stray dog I couldn't kick. I took my envelope of cash. I did not argue. Arguing with Brenda was useless. She was just a gatekeeper for an algorithm. My father had not just kicked me out of a house. He had exiled me from the economy. He had leveraged my identity so heavily to keep his own sinking ships afloat that I was technically drowning in debt before I had even bought a crib. I walked out to my car. It was an old sedan I had bought off Craigslist for $2,000. Using a fake name because I was terrified a creditor would find it and tow it. It was my lifeboat. That night, I learned that sleeping in a car when you are 6 months pregnant is not just uncomfortable. It is a lesson in geometry and pain management. I parked in the back corner of a 24/7 grocery store lot off the interstate. I chose it because it was well lit and there were security cameras. I figured if someone tried to murder me, at least there would be footage. The cold in Colorado is not polite. It does not knock. It invades. I had a sleeping bag and 2 heavy wool blankets, but the chill seeped through the windows. I developed a system. I would run the engine for 10 minutes to blast the heat, then turn it off and try to sleep for 40 minutes before the cold woke me up again. I could not afford to waste gas. Gas cost money, and I had to hoard every penny for the baby. I lay in the back seat, my knees pulled up as much as my belly would allow. My hip bone pressed against the seatbelt buckle. I could feel the baby moving, restless, perhaps sensing the drop in temperature. I rubbed the swell of my stomach through the layers of wool. "We are camping." I whispered to her, "It is just an adventure." But it was not an adventure. It was survival. I would watch the shoppers go in and out of the store at 2 a.m, people buying milk, cigarettes, frozen pizzas, normal people with warm houses and beds that did not smell like gasoline and despair. I did not cry. Crying dehydrates you, and water cost $1 a bottle if I didn't want a drink from the bathroom tap at the gas station. I simply watched them, cataloging their normalcy, hating them just a little bit, and then hating myself for the envy. 2 weeks later, I found a job. It was not in finance. No bank would hire someone with a credit report that looked like a crime scene. I found work at a place called Harborvale Freight, a logistics warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. The building was a corrugated metal box that vibrated constantly with the sound of forklifts and semi-trucks backing into the loading docks. I was hired as an intake clerk. The pay was $12 an hour. My job was to process bills of lading, staple invoices, and answer the phone when angry truckers called to scream about detention time. I wore baggy sweatshirts to hide the pregnancy as long as I could. I was terrified that if they saw the baby coming, they would see a medical leave they didn't want to pay for and fire me. I worked with my head down. I typed faster than anyone else. I organized the filing cabinets that had been in chaos for a decade. I made myself indispensable not because I was ambitious, but because I was terrified. The office manager was a man named Elias. He was 60 years old, with skin like leather and lungs that rattled from 40 years of smoking menthols. He was not a kind man. He did not ask about my day. He did not bring in donuts, but he was observant. One afternoon, the office phone rang. I answered it, giving the standard greeting. "Harborvale Freight. This is Mackenzie." "Is this Mackenzie Black?" a harsh voice on the other end asked. My stomach dropped. It was a collection agency. They had found my workplace. "I am sorry. There is no one here by that name." I lied, my voice steady. "Don't lie to me, lady. We traced your social to this payroll. You owe First National $18,000 on a revolving line of credit. We are going to garnish your wages. We are going to—" I hung up. My hands were shaking. I looked up to see Elias leaning in the doorway, watching me. He took a drag of his cigarette, which he wasn't supposed to smoke indoors, and exhaled a blue cloud. "Debt collectors?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak. I waited for him to fire me. Employers hate garnishments. It is extra paperwork for them. He walked over to my desk. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. "Give me your credit report," he said. "What? You have a folder in your bag. I have seen you reading it at lunch." "Give it to me." I hesitated, then pulled out the tattered manila envelope. I handed it to him. Elias flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the lines of red ink, the defaults, the inquiries. He hummed a low, gravelly sound. "This isn't consumer debt," he said, tapping a line with a yellow-stained finger. "This is commercial leverage, bridge loans, supplier credit lines. Who did you piss off? Or who are you covering for?" "I am not covering for anyone," I said, my voice sharp. It was done to me. "Identity theft." "Family theft," I corrected. Elias chuckled. A dry sound like sandpaper. "The worst kind. Harder to prove. Judges hate getting involved in Thanksgiving drama." He dropped the file back on my desk. "You are fighting them wrong, kid. You are writing letters saying, 'This isn't me.' They don't care. To them, you are just a social security number that signed a paper." "Then what do?" I asked. "You stop acting like a victim and start acting like an auditor." Elias said. He pulled up a chair. "Look here. See this inquiry pattern? 3 hard pulls in 1 week, all from lenders in the same zip code as the original default. That is sloppy. That is desperation. And look at the dates. This loan was originated 2 days after the previous one went into delinquency. That is what we call kiting in the trucking business. Moving debt to pay debt. He pointed to a small code at the bottom of a credit entry. You see this? This is a disputes code. If you file a dispute based on identity theft, they ask for a police report. You don't have one because you didn't arrest your daddy. But if you file a dispute based on verification of accuracy, they have 30 days to produce the original wet ink contract. If they can't find it in the warehouse because they sold the debt to a junk buyer, they have to delete the entry. It was the first time someone had given me a weapon instead of a platitude. From that day on, I stopped sleeping in the car. I found a room in a boarding house for $400 a month. It was the size of a closet and smelled of boiled cabbage, but it had a lock and a radiator. Every night, I sat on the narrow mattress with my documents spread out around me. I stopped crying over the betrayal. I started dissecting it. I gathered every envelope, every collection notice. I called banks pretending to be a secretary from Blackwell Crown Development, asking for copies of lost contracts for our files. I charmed low-level clerks. I got them to email me PDFs of the promissory notes my father had signed with my name. I saw the signatures. The loops were perfect. He had practiced. Or maybe he had made his secretary. Mrs. Gable. Practice. I printed them out. I taped them to the peeling wallpaper of my room. I wasn't building a scrapbook. I was building a dossier. Harlow arrived on a stormy Tuesday in November. I drove myself to the county hospital when the contractions were 5 minutes apart. I parked the car in the long-term lot because it was cheaper than the emergency ramp. I walked into the ER, stopping every few yards to breathe through the pain that felt like a belt tightening around my spine. The labor was 18 hours of isolation. I watched other women in the ward with their husbands, their mothers, their flowers. I had nothing but a nurse named Sarah who held my hand when the pushing got bad. When they placed Harlow on my chest, she was small and red and screaming. She weighed 6 pounds and 4 ounces. I touched her wet hair. I looked at her fingers, so tiny and perfect. She was the only thing in my world that did not have a price tag attached to it. I looked into her dark eyes, which were still trying to focus on this cold, bright world. I am sorry I do not have a house for you, I whispered to her. I am sorry your grandfather thinks you are a write-off. She gripped my finger, her grip surprisingly strong. I felt a fierce, terrifying heat rise in my chest. It was not the soft love of a mother in a diaper commercial. It was the hard, protective instinct of a wolf. I do not need pity, I told her. Though she could not understand, I need time. Just give me time. I took her back to the boarding house 3 days later. The crib was a pack-and-play I had bought secondhand. I went back to work at Harborvale 6 weeks later, leaving Harlow with a neighbor, an older woman who accepted cash under the table. The years began to blur. I worked all day at the warehouse, moving from intake clerk to shift supervisor. I learned how logistics worked. I learned how money moved through the cracks of industry. And every night, after Harlow fell asleep, I fought the war. I filed complaints with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I sent certified letters to the creditors. Dear Sirs, I am requesting validation of this debt pursuant to the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. Please provide proof of my signature. The responses were always the same: frustrating, dismissive, case verified. The debt belongs to you. My father had covered his tracks well. The addresses on the loans were a P.O. box he controlled. The phone numbers were routed to his office, on paper. I looked like a willing participant in his financial schemes. The system is designed to believe the paperwork, not the person. They pushed me into a corner, demanding I prove a negative. They wanted me to prove I didn't sign it. I hit walls. I hit dead ends. I had days where I wanted to drive back to Briar Ridge and burn his house down, but I didn't. I kept the anger cold. I kept it solid. Every night, before I turned off the lamp, I opened a black notebook. It was the only thing I spent money on that wasn't a necessity. I picked up my pen and wrote the same sentence, over and over again, like a prayer or a curse. One day, I will buy back this shame. I wrote it until my hand cramped. I wrote it until the ink bled through the page. I wasn't just waiting for karma. I was preparing to become the karma. I was saving every dollar. I was studying the distressed debt market. I was learning that in America, if you owe the bank $100, that is your problem. But if you buy the bank's bad debt, you own the problem, and you own the person who created it. I looked at Harlow sleeping in her crib, her chest rising and falling in the rhythm of the innocent. "Sleep tight, baby girl," I whispered. "Mommy is working on the acquisition strategy. 7 years is a long time. In the world of geology, it is nothing. In the world of finance, it is 2 or 3 full market cycles. But in the life of a woman who was once kicked out into the snow with nothing but a coat and a grudge, 7 years is an eternity. It is enough time to shed a skin. It is enough time to die and be reborn." I stood 30 floors above the pavement, pressing my hand against the cold, floor-to-ceiling glass of my corner office. Below me, the Chicago skyline was a jagged jaw of steel and light. Biting into the gray sky, the wind off Lake Michigan was whipping through the streets, rattling the windows of lesser buildings. But up here, in the headquarters of Blackstone Meridian Recovery, there was only silence. Expensive, insulated silence. I turned away from the view. My reflection caught in the glass for a second. The woman staring back at me was 29 years old. She wore a tailored black suit that cost more than the car I used to sleep in. Her hair was cut into a sharp, asymmetrical bob that required maintenance every 3 weeks. Her makeup was flawless, a mask of neutral tones designed to reveal nothing. I was no longer Mackenzie the victim. I was Mackenzie the CEO. Blackstone Meridian Recovery was not a collection agency. We did not call grandmothers at dinner time to harass them over a $50 medical bill. We were a distressed debt acquisition firm. We bought commercial paper. We bought the mistakes of banks and the failures of developers. When a company started to drown, when the original lender lost hope and just wanted to clear the bad loan off their books for pennies on the dollar, I stepped in. I bought the debt, and with the debt, I bought the leverage. I did not call myself a good person. Good people forgive. Good people move on. I was not interested in goodness. I was interested in precision. I was interested in the physics of consequence. I walked over to my desk. It was a slab of white marble, devoid of clutter. There were no pictures of my daughter. Harlow, on display. Harlow was 7 now, safe in a private school, living in a penthouse 3 blocks away. I kept her life completely separate from this room. This room was for hunting. I tapped the spacebar on my laptop. Waking the screen, a spreadsheet glowed in the dim light. It was a file I had been building and refining for 6 months. The header read, Blackwell Crown Development, Liquidity Analysis. My father, Howard Blackwell, was still playing the role of the tycoon in Briar Ridge. To the outside world, he was still the king of the mountain. He still drove the latest model luxury sedan. He still held court at the country club, drinking aged scotch and telling anyone who would listen about the trials of running a legacy business. I knew his schedule better than he did. I knew that on Tuesday nights, he played poker with the mayor. I knew that on Friday afternoons, he got a manicure. And I knew exactly what stories he told about me. I had hired a private investigator a year ago, just to listen. The reports were consistent. Howard told people I had run away. He told them I was mentally unstable, that I had joined a cult or gotten hooked on drugs. He painted himself as the grieving, confused father who had tried everything to save his wayward daughter. He used my absence as social currency, a tragedy that made him seem deeper, more complex. He had turned his betrayal of me into a sympathy card. He was keeping his name clean by muddying mine. But the spreadsheet told a different story. The spreadsheet did not care about his reputation. It cared about his cash flow. And his cash flow was bleeding out. Blackwell Crown Development was dying. The West River Project, the one he had frantically tried to fund 7 years ago by stealing my identity, was still unfinished. It was a money pit. He had taken out construction loans, then bridge loans to pay the interest on the construction loans, and now he was looking for mezzanine financing just to keep the lights on. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Peter was getting impatient. I traced a finger down the column of numbers. He was currently in default on 3 major commercial notes held by regional banks. These banks were nervous. They were looking at their quarterly reports and seeing a red line where Howard Blackwell's name stood. They wanted out. They wanted cash. And they didn't care if they took a loss to get it. That was where I came in. I checked my watch. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Noah Kincaid was due in 5 minutes. I needed a face. I could not buy the debt myself. If the name Blackstone Meridian appeared on any paperwork, Howard might not recognize it immediately, but a quick Google search would reveal me as the founder. If he saw my name, he would not sign the restructuring agreements I needed him to sign. He would run. He would file for bankruptcy protection. He would hide assets. He would burn the house down before he let me take the keys. I needed a ghost. The intercom on my desk buzzed. The receptionist's voice was crisp. "Mr. Kincaid is here to see you. Miss Black, send him in," I said. The heavy glass doors opened, and Noah Kincaid walked in. He was exactly what I had ordered. He was in his mid-30s, tall, with the kind of nondescript handsomeness that works well in courtrooms. He wore a navy suit that was perfectly tailored but conservative. He did not look like a shark. He looked like a confidant. He looked like the kind of lawyer you hire when you want to handle things quietly, without the press finding out. He carried a leather briefcase and walked with a confidence that suggested he knew his billable hours were worth every cent. "Ms. Black," he said, nodding respectfully. He did not offer a hand until I offered mine. His grip was firm, dry, and brief. "Mr. Kincaid," I said, gesturing to the chair opposite my desk. "Thank you for coming." I sat down and studied him. Noah Kincaid was a specialist in corporate restructuring and aggressive litigation. He had a reputation for being cold. He didn't scream in court. He didn't pound tables. He simply laid out facts in a way that made the opposition feel stupid for even trying to argue. He was a scalpel. "I trust you have reviewed the preliminary file I sent over," I asked. "I have," Noah said. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder. He placed it on the marble desk. "You are looking to acquire a portfolio of distressed commercial notes currently held by 3 different regional banks. The total face value is roughly $12 million. The debtor is a single entity, Blackwell Crown Development." He looked up at me, his eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. He paused for a beat, just long enough to let me know he had done his homework. I also noticed the name of the principal on the debt. Noah said evenly, "Howard Blackwell." I assume there is a relation. I did not flinch. I did not look away. "Yes," I said, "he is my father." Noah nodded slowly. He did not look surprised. He did not look judgmental. He looked like he was calculating the risk premium. "Does he know you are the purchaser?" Noah asked. "No," I said, "and he cannot know. That is why you are here." I stood up and walked back to the window. I wanted him to see the back of my suit. I wanted him to see the posture of someone who was not asking for a favor, but issuing a command. "I am establishing a special purpose vehicle, a shell company called Northbridge Portfolio LLC," I said, watching the traffic crawl on the streets below. "You will be the authorized representative of Northbridge. You will approach the banks. You will negotiate the purchase of the debt. You will tell them you are representing a private equity group looking for real estate exposure. They will be so happy to get the toxic assets off their books. They won't ask many questions about the beneficial owners. And once we own the debt," Noah asked to my back, "do we foreclose? Do we liquidate?" I turned around to face him. "No," I said, "we do not foreclose. Not yet." I walked back to the desk and leaned against it, crossing my arms. "If we foreclose immediately, he will fight," I explained. "He will drag it out in court for 2 years. He will hide money in shell accounts I can't find. He will play the victim. He will say the big bad vultures are stealing his life's work." I paused, letting the silence settle in the room. I do not want his buildings. Noah, I do not want his excavators or his trucks. I want his signature. Noah cocked his head slightly to the side. I am not following. I picked up a pen and twirled it between my fingers. The current loan documents are messy. They are old. The personal guarantees are vague. There are loopholes he can wiggle through. Before we drop the hammer, I need him to sign a forbearance agreement. A forbearance agreement, Noah asked, skepticism creeping into his voice. You want to give him more time? I smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I want to offer him a lifeline. I said, you will go to him as the new lender. You will tell him that Northbridge Portfolio is benevolent. You will tell him we see potential in his business. You will offer to restructure the debt, to lower his monthly payments, to give him 6 months of breathing room. Noah frowned. Why would you do that if the goal is… Because, I interrupted, my voice dropping an octave. In exchange for that breathing room, he will have to sign a new set of loan documents. Documents that you will draft. Documents that will strip away every single protection he has. You will include a clause that requires him to reaffirm the validity of all collateral. You will include a confession of judgment, and most importantly, you will include an affidavit of accuracy regarding his past financial statements. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the cold marble. I know he lied on his applications. Noah, I know he listed assets he doesn't own. I know he double-pledged collateral. But right now, that is just my word against his. If I accuse him, he denies it. But if you get him to sign a new document, reaffirming those lies under penalty of perjury, then I don't just have a debtor, I have a criminal. Noah sat back in his chair. A look of understanding washed over his face. It was the look of a mechanic appreciating a finely tuned engine. You want him to perjure himself, Noah said. You want him to hand you the smoking gun. I want him to be comfortable. I said, I want him to think he got away with it. I want him to think he outsmarted another bank. He is arrogant. Noah. He believes he can talk his way out of anything. He won't read the fine print if he thinks the deal saves his skin. He will sign because he is desperate, and because he thinks he is smarter than everyone else in the room. Noah looked down at the file again. He ran his thumb over the edge of the paper. This is personal, he stated. It was not a question. I walked over to the sideboard and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I watched the bubbles rise to the surface. He kicked me out when I was 22 and pregnant. I said, my voice devoid of emotion. He told me I was a liability. He told me I was a bad investment. I took a sip of the water. It was cold and sharp. I am not trying to destroy him for sport. Noah, I am trying to correct the ledger. He built his survival on my destruction. He used my name to float his loans without my consent. He stole my credit to save his ego. I turned back to Noah. I don't need him to collapse financially. That is too easy. Men like him go bankrupt and bounce back in a year with a new LLC. I need him to sign the truth. I need a legal document, signed by his hand, that proves he is a fraud. I want the power to take everything not because I won a lawsuit, but because he gave it to me. Noah closed the folder. He snapped the latches of his briefcase shut. The sound echoed in the large office. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was a glimmer of genuine respect in his eyes. Northbridge Portfolio LLC, he said, testing the name. It sounds respectable. Dull? Safe? Exactly, I said. He stood up and smoothed his jacket. I will contact the regional banks tomorrow morning. I will offer them 50 cents on the dollar. They will likely counter at 60. We will settle at 55. Once we control the paper, I will schedule a meeting with your father. Good, I said. One question. Ms. Black, Noah said, pausing at the door. Yes. When the trap shuts, do you want to be there? I looked out at the skyline one last time. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, bruised shadows over the city. Oh, I will be there, I said softly, but not until the ink is dry. Noah nodded and walked out. The heavy glass door clicked shut, sealing me back in the silence. I went back to my desk and looked at the spreadsheet. I highlighted the cell with the total debt amount. It was a large number. To most people, it was a fortune. To me, it was the price of admission. My father had taught me that everything was a business transaction. He had taught me that love was conditional and that loyalty was a line item on a balance sheet. He had spent 7 years thinking he had written me off. He was about to learn that off-balance sheet liabilities are always the most dangerous ones. I saved the file and closed the laptop. The screen went black, reflecting my face one last time. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The deal was in motion. And unlike my father, I always read the fine print. The acquisition of a man's ruin is surprisingly quiet. There are no sirens, no explosions, and no dramatic confrontations in the rain. It happens in the hushed, air-conditioned rooms of compliance departments, accompanied by the soft click of a mouse confirming a wire transfer. For 3 days, I did not leave the 31st floor of the Blackstone Meridian building. I lived on espresso and the adrenaline of the hunt. My objective was simple total encirclement. My father, Howard Blackwell, had spread his liabilities across 3 regional banks: High Plains Community, First Century, and Red River Trust. These were not Wall Street giants that could absorb a loss without blinking. These were mid-sized institutions that panicked when a developer with a recognizable last name started missing interest payments. I did not make the calls myself. My voice would have been a variable I could not control. Instead, I sat in the conference room, listening on the speakerphone as Noah Kincaid executed the strategy we had designed. "I represent Northbridge Portfolio LLC," Noah said to the distressed asset manager at First Century. His voice was smooth, devoid of any predatory edge. "We are a private investment vehicle looking to acquire underperforming commercial real estate paper. We understand you are holding a significant position with Blackwell Crown Development that is currently 90 days past due." I could hear the hesitation on the other end of the line, followed quickly by the desperate hope of a banker who wanted to save his quarterly bonus. The banker tried to posture. He talked about the value of the underlying land and the reputation of the Blackwell name. Noah cut him off, gently but firmly. "We have done our due diligence. The land is undeveloped, and the zoning permits are expiring. We are offering 55 cents on the dollar for the entire note. Cash settlement. Closing within 24 hours. You get it off your books before the audit committee meets on Friday." 55 cents was an insult. It was a bloodbath, but it was also immediate liquidity. One by one, they folded. High Plains Community sold their note by Tuesday afternoon. First Century capitulated on Wednesday morning. Red River Trust, the most stubborn of the 3, held out until Thursday lunch, trying to squeeze us for 60 cents. Noah held the line at 55, threatening to walk away and let them deal with the inevitable foreclosure litigation themselves. They signed at 2 o'clock. By Friday evening, Northbridge Portfolio LLC was the sole owner of $12 million of my father's debt. I held the promissory notes. I held the mortgages. I held the power to seize his bulldozers, his office building, and the very chair he sat in. To him, Northbridge was just a nameless, faceless entity that had bailed out his angry bankers. He probably thought he had bought himself more time. He had no idea he had just been sold to the executioner, but I was not done. I spent Saturday morning combing through the deeper layers of the public filings. I wanted to see every tendon and muscle of his financial skeleton. I pulled the Uniform Commercial Code filings, the documents that list collateral pledged for loans. Most of it was standard heavy machinery. Accounts receivable, future rents. Then I saw it. It was a filing for a revolving credit line of $500,000, issued by a secondary lender 2 years ago. The collateral was unusual. It was not secured by Blackwell Crown assets. It was secured by a personal guarantee from a third party. I zoomed in on the signature at the bottom of the guarantee. Grant Sutter. I leaned back in my chair, a cold smile touching my lips. Grant Sutter was my father's personal attorney. He was the man who had sat at our dinner table, drinking my father's wine, laughing at his jokes, and drafting the legal threats that kept my father's enemies at bay. He was the gatekeeper. Why would a lawyer personally guarantee his client's debt? I dug deeper into Grant Sutter's own financial profile. It did not take long to find the answer. Greed and ambition are a dangerous cocktail. Grant had expanded his law firm aggressively 3 years ago, opening a satellite office in Denver and hiring 5 new associates. He had overextended himself. He needed billable hours, and Howard Blackwell was his whale. My father must have leveraged that desperation, convincing Grant to co-sign a loan to keep the company afloat, promising him that it was just a formality and that the big payout from the West River project was just around the corner. Grant Sutter was not just an attorney anymore. He was a partner in the risk. I opened a new search window. I looked for debt held by Sutter Associates. I found it quickly. A business expansion loan with a fintech lender that specialized in high-interest capital for law firms. The balance was significant, and the payment history was spotty. Grant was struggling to keep his own lights on while propping up my father's house of cards. This was the leverage I hadn't expected, but I knew exactly how to use it. I picked up my cell phone and called a contact I had at a boutique hedge fund in New York, a small outfit that bought high-risk professional service debt. I did not use Northbridge for this. I used a different shell, a dormant entity called Obsidian Creek. I want to buy a specific commercial loan. I told the broker, the debtor is Sutter Associates. Why, the broker asked, the yield is garbage. I'm not buying it for the yield. I said, I am buying the voting rights. Get it done. By Monday morning, I owned the lawyer, the trap was set, I controlled the battlefield, and I controlled the man responsible for defending it. It was time to invite the mouse into the maze. Noah came into my office at 10 o'clock. He looked fresh, rested, and ready. He placed a thick binder on my desk. It was bound in navy blue leather, looking every bit the standard corporate refinancing agreement. This is the restructuring proposal. Noah said, it is standard boilerplate on the surface. We are offering to consolidate the 3 notes into one, lower the interest rate by 2 points, and extend the maturity date by 18 months. It looks like a gift, I said, running my hand over the leather cover. It does. Noah agreed, but the covenants are strict. Tell me about the trapdoors. I said. Noah opened the binder to page 42. Here, Section 8, Paragraph C. The borrower acknowledges that all financial statements provided to the lender, past and present, are true and accurate. Any material misrepresentation constitutes an immediate event of default and triggers the acceleration clause. He flipped to page 90, and here, the confession of judgment. By signing this, he waives his right to a trial or a defense if he defaults. He effectively agrees that if he misses a payment or breaks a covenant, we can walk into a court and get a judgment against him the same day. Without him even being present to object, and the affidavit I asked, Noah pointed to the appendix, the affidavit of accuracy. It requires him to list all current collateral free of other encumbrances. He has to swear under oath that he hasn't pledged the same assets to other lenders. I nodded. I knew for a fact he had double-pledged the excavators. I knew he had listed the vacation home in Aspen as an asset, even though he had transferred it to a trust in Marla's name 3 months ago. If he signs this, he is committing perjury. I said, yes, Noah said, but if he doesn't sign it, Northbridge forecloses on the original notes tomorrow. He has no cash to pay us off. He is cornered. He will want time to review it. I said, he will want Grant Sutter to read every line. That is why we control the clock. Noah said. I looked at the digital clock on my desk. It was Monday. 11 in the morning. Call him. I said, tell him Northbridge Portfolio has acquired his debt. Tell him we are benevolent investors who believe in the Blackwell brand. Tell him we have a rescue package ready to go. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the ant-like cars crawling through the canyon of the street. But tell him the offer expires in 48 hours. I said, tell him the funds are allocated from a specific capital pool that closes on Wednesday at noon. If the documents are not signed and returned by then, the deal is off, and we move to immediate liquidation. 48 hours. Noah repeated, that is tight for a document this complex. Panic makes people blind. Noah. I said, he needs the money. He needs the relief. He is drowning, and we are throwing him a rope. He won't notice that the rope is actually a noose until he has already put his head through it. And Grant Sutter, Noah asked, the lawyer will try to slow it down. He will tell Howard to wait. I smiled. A sharp, humorless expression. Grant won't slow anything down. I said, Grant is currently worried about his own credit line being called. I will have the servicing agent for his loan send him a polite, Notice of review this afternoon. Just enough to make him sweat. Just enough to make him distractible. He will be so focused on saving his own firm that he will skim my father's paperwork. He will tell Howard to sign just to get the fee and keep the cash flowing. It was cruel. It was manipulative. And it was exactly what they had done to me. They had used the fine print to destroy my life. Now, I was going to use the fine print to take theirs. Send the courier. I ordered. Make sure the binder is heavy. He likes things that feel important. Noah nodded and left the room. I sat back down and opened the spreadsheet again. I watched the cursor blink in the cell next to Howard Blackwell's name. For 7 years. I had been the liability. I had been the red ink on his ledger. I typed in a new entry. Status pending acquisition. The wait began. 48 hours. 2 days for my father to decide if he was desperate enough to sign his life away to a stranger. I knew the answer before the question was even asked. He was a Blackwell. He would always choose the money, and that choice would be his final mistake. The trap was not set in a dark alley or a courtroom. It was set in the presidential suite of the Ravens Court Center, a glass and steel monolith on the edge of the financial district. We had rented the suite for the day under the name Northbridge Portfolio. The room was designed to intimidate. The table was polished mahogany, the chairs were Italian leather, and the view of the city screamed money. In the center of the conference table sat a single laptop, open and facing the empty chair at the head of the table. A small note card next to it read, Silent Partner/Remote Observer. I was not in that chair. I was in the adjoining room, separated by a heavy oak door that I had locked from my side. I sat in front of a monitor bank, watching the high-definition feed from the suite's internal security system. This wasn't espionage. It wasn't hacking. I owned the lease on the suite for the next 24 hours. I was legally entitled to record any business conducted within my premises. I adjusted the volume on my headset, the silence in my small room amplifying the pounding of my own heart. At 10 o'clock sharp, the double doors of the suite opened. My father walked in first. Howard Blackwell looked older than the pictures in the society pages. His suit, a bespoke pinstripe that used to fit him like armor, hung slightly loose at the shoulders. Stress had eaten away at him, hollowing out his cheeks and graying his temples, but his stride was the same. It was the stride of a man who believed he owned the floor he walked on. He scanned the room, not with gratitude for the rescue, but with the critical eye of a buyer inspecting a product. Behind him walked a ghost from my past. Trent Vale. Seeing him on the screen felt like a physical blow to my stomach. He was taller than I remembered, or maybe just stiffer. He wore a gray suit that was clearly off the rack, ill-fitting around the collar. He carried a thick leather briefcase with both hands, clutching it like a shield. He had been the boy who promised to drive me to California. He had been the boy who held my hand when the stick turned pink. Now, he was the man walking 3 paces behind my father, carrying his paperwork. He wasn't a partner. He was an accessory. Howard threw his coat onto a chair without looking to see if it landed. He didn't greet the empty room. He walked straight to the window, staring out at the city he thought he still commanded. "Where is this Kincaid?" Howard barked, checking his gold watch. "I don't have all day." Trent set the briefcase on the table and opened it nervously. He said he would be here at 10:15. "Mr. Blackwell, we are early." Howard scoffed. "We are not early." "He is late. When you are the one holding the checkbook, you make people wait. When you are the one needing the signature, you show up early. That is the rule." I watched Howard pace the room. He looked like a caged tiger, dangerous but cornered. He stopped at the sideboard and poured himself a glass of water from the crystal pitcher. He drank it in one gulp. "This deal better be real," Howard muttered, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "I am sick of these bottom feeders wasting my time." "It looks solid." "Sir," Trent said, his voice tentative. "The terms are generous, almost too generous." "Don't be an idiot." "Trent," Howard snapped, "it's not generous. It's opportunistic. They want the interest. They see the value in the West River land. They know that once I get the zoning cleared, That dirt is worth triple what we owe. They are just smart enough to bet on the jockey, not the horse. I leaned closer to the screen. The arrogance was breathtaking. He was drowning in $12 million of bad debt, yet he still believed he was the prize. Howard sat down at the table, drumming his fingers on the wood. He looked at the laptop with the silent partner note. He sneered at it. Cowards, he muttered. Money always hides behind a screen these days. Nobody has the guts to look you in the eye when they are squeezing you. He turned to Trent. Did you move the liquidity like I asked? Trent hesitated, glancing at the laptop as if he knew someone was watching. I set up the transfer, sir, but the payroll account is already overdrawn. If we move $50,000 to the Cayman holding entity, the checks for the site crew will bounce on Friday. Let them bounce. Howard slammed his hand on the table. The crew can wait a week. They are used to it. But if I miss the payment on the Bentley lease, they take the car. If I miss the deposit on the Aspen rental, we lose the reservation for Christmas. You think I can show my face at the club if I'm driving a loaner? But the men. Trent started. The men are replaceable. Howard shouted. My reputation is not. You pay the car. You pay the house. The workers can file a claim if they want. By the time it hits the court, we will have the Northbridge money, and we can pay them off with a bonus to shut them up. I typed rapidly into my log. Priority asset hiding. Intentional payroll fraud. Priority of personal luxury over operational solvent. This was gold. He was admitting to piercing the corporate veil. He was treating company funds as his personal piggy bank in a bankruptcy court. This conversation alone would be enough to strip him of any protection. Howard leaned back, loosening his tie. And this plan, this restructuring, it buys us 6 months. 6 months. Trent confirmed. Good, Howard said, staring at the ceiling. We take the cash. We pay off the immediate fires. We get the heat off, and in 5 months, we do it again. We find another lender. We refinance the refinance. You aren't going to finish the project, Trent asked. Surprised. Finish it. Howard laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. Trent, look at the market. Construction costs are up 20%. If we finish it, we lose money. The money isn't in the building. The money is in the financing. We keep the project active. We keep the loans churning. We live on the fees and the float. That is how the game is played. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. He wasn't a developer. He was a Ponzi scheme in a pinstripe suit. He had no intention of building anything. He was just cycling debt to fund his lifestyle. Trent looked down at his hands. He looked tired. He looked beaten. Howard looked at him with disdain. You look like a funeral director. Trent, perk up. We are about to close a $12 million deal. Trent paused. I was thinking about the date. What date? It's November 14th, Trent said quietly. So Howard asked, bored. It is her birthday, Trent said. Mackenzie. She would have been 29 today. The name hung in the room like smoke. I stopped typing. My breath hitched. I hadn't realized Trent remembered. Howard's face hardened. The boredom vanished, replaced by a sneer of pure disgust. Don't say that name, Howard hissed. I just wonder where she is, Trent said, his voice barely audible. If she is okay, she is dead to this family, Howard said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. She made her choice. She chose to be a whore. She chose to be a liability. She was your daughter, Trent said, a spark of defiance in his eyes. She was a mistake, Howard shouted. Standing up. She was weak. She couldn't handle the pressure. She ran away because she didn't have the spine to be a Blackwell. She is probably waiting tables in some diner in Nevada, living in a trailer park. That is where she belongs. She is a stain. Trent, a bad asset. You write it off and you move on. I watched Trent shrink back into his chair. He didn't fight back. He didn't defend me. He just nodded, accepting the erasure of my existence as the price of his paycheck. You are right, sir. Trent murmured, I am sorry. I stared at the screen. My hands were shaking, not with sadness, but with a cold, terrifying clarity. He didn't just kick me out. He despised me. He needed to believe I was a failure to justify his own cruelty. If I was a success, then he was a monster. So he had invented a version of me that deserved to be discarded. I looked down at my notes. I didn't need to write down his insults. I had heard them all before, but I wrote down his weakness. He believes I'm gone. He believes I am weak. He believes he is safe. I checked the time. It was 10:14. Noah Kincaid was standing in the hallway, waiting for my signal. I picked up my phone and sent a single text message to Noah. Go. He is ready to sign, and he is guilty. I watched on the screen as the door to the suite opened. Noah walked in, the leather binder tucked under his arm. He looked professional, calm, and utterly lethal. Mr. Blackwell, Noah said, extending a hand. I apologize for the wait. I am Noah Kincaid. Howard transformed instantly. The snarling tyrant vanished. He put on his charming CEO mask, smiling broadly, pumping Noah's hand. Mr. Kincaid, no trouble at all. We were just admiring the view. Beautiful city, isn't it? It is, Noah said, placing the binder on the table, especially when you own the right parts of it. I sat back in my chair in the dark room next door. I watched my father laugh at Noah's joke. I watched him sit down, eager to sign the papers that he thought would save him. I didn't feel triumph yet. I felt the cold patience of a hunter who has just watched the prey step into the snare. Happy birthday to me. I whispered to the screen. I reached for my water, my eyes never leaving Howard's face. He was about to sign his confession, and I was going to frame it. The leather binder hit the mahogany table with a heavy, dull thud that vibrated through the high-definition audio feed. It was a sound I had been waiting 7 years to hear. To my father. It sounded like salvation. To me. It sounded like the shutting of a steel cage. Noah Kincaid stood over the table, his posture relaxed but commanding. He did not sit down. He slid the binder across the polished wood toward Howard Blackwell. This is the restructuring agreement, Mr. Blackwell, Noah said, his voice calm and professional. It consolidates your 3 existing notes into a single instrument held by Northbridge Portfolio. It extends your maturity date by 18 months and provides an immediate capital injection of $500,000 to cover your operational shortfalls. Howard looked at the binder as if it were a holy scripture. His hands, usually so steady when holding a Scotch glass, trembled slightly as he reached for it. He didn't open it immediately. He rested his hand on the cover, feeling the reality of the money. He was thinking about the Bentley he could keep. He was thinking about the country club dues he could pay. He was thinking about the lie he could continue to live. Open it, I whispered to the monitor in the dark room next door. Howard flipped the cover open. He did exactly what I knew he would do. He didn't read the preamble. He didn't read the definitions. He flipped rapidly through the first 20 pages, his eyes darting, looking for the numbers. He was starving, and he wasn't interested in the ingredients of the meal. He just wanted to eat. Page 5, interest rate. He nodded. Page 10, disbursement schedule. He licked his lips. He looked up at Noah, a smile returning to his face. The color was coming back to his cheeks. This looks standard, Howard said, his voice regaining some of its old bluster. Better than standard. Actually, you guys must really want into the Briar Ridge market. We see value where others see risk, Noah said smoothly. Howard chuckled. That is what I have been telling those idiots at the bank for months. Value is about vision. He reached for his fountain pen, a heavy gold Mont Blanc that he had owned since I was a child. He uncapped it, ready to sign the signature page at the back. Just one moment. Mr. Blackwell, Noah said. He didn't raise his voice, but the command was absolute. Howard froze, the pen hovering inches above the paper. He looked up, annoyed at the interruption. What is it, before you execute the agreement? I need to draw your attention to Appendix C, Noah said. He reached over and turned the pages of the binder, bypassing the financial tables and landing on a document near the end. It was printed on heavier bond paper. Howard looked down. What is this? It is an affidavit of accuracy, Noah explained. It is a standard requirement for our risk committee. Since we are moving so quickly, closing this in under 48 hours without a full field audit, we require the borrower to self-certify the status of the collateral. I leaned in closer to the screen. This was the kill zone. Noah continued. You are confirming that the assets listed in Schedule A, specifically the heavy machinery, the excavators, the loaders, and the grading equipment are currently in your possession, are in good working order, and are free of any other liens or encumbrances. You are also certifying that the financial statements provided to us are true and correct. Howard stared at the page. I saw his throat work as he swallowed. I knew something he didn't think anyone knew. I knew that 3 weeks ago, in the dead of night, a repossession crew hired by a heavy equipment leasing company in Utah had entered the West River site. They had loaded 4 Caterpillar excavators and 3 bulldozers onto flatbed trucks and hauled them away. Howard had defaulted on the equipment leases months ago. Those machines were the primary collateral for this new loan. He was pledging ghosts. I also knew about the twist that had been sitting in my memory for 7 years. That gift box I had left on the dining table the night he kicked me out didn't just contain the debt notices. It contained a copy of a memo I had found in his home office trash can back then. It was an internal directive to his HR manager, instructing them to list Mackenzie Black as the corporate secretary on the org chart, solely for the purpose of authorizing banking resolutions. I had never worked there. I had never been the secretary. He had created a fake role for me to legitimize the fake signatures he was forging. That memo proved intention. It proved that his fraud wasn't an accident. It was a policy. And now, he was about to sign a document swearing that he had never falsified corporate records. Howard looked up at Noah, his eyes narrowing slightly. Is this necessary? The banks already have the lien filings. The banks are gone. Noah said, We are the bank now. And yes, it is necessary. It includes an acceleration clause. What does that mean? Trent asked from the side. It was the first time he had spoken in 10 minutes. Noah turned to Trent. It means that if we find that any of these representations are false, if the equipment isn't there, or if the financials are cooked, the entire $12 million becomes due and payable immediately. Not in months, instantly. And since it is a confession of judgment, we can seize personal assets to satisfy the balance without a trial. The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed. Howard looked back down at the affidavit. He read the list of equipment. Caterpillar 336, excavator. Serial number ending in 559. He knew that machine was gone. He knew it was sitting in an auction yard in Salt Lake City. If he signed, he was committing perjury and bank fraud. If he didn't sign, he got no money. I saw the bead of sweat form on his temple. It tracked down his skin and vanished into his collar. He was doing the math. He was calculating the odds. He was thinking, they are an investment firm from Chicago. They won't drive out to a muddy construction site in Colorado to count bulldozers. I can sign this, get the cash, lease new machines next week, and nobody will ever know. He looked at Trent. Trent looked terrified. Trent knew the machines were gone too. But Trent was weak. He wouldn't speak unless spoken to. This is a lot of paperwork for a bridge loan, Howard grumbled, trying to sound irritated rather than panicked. It is a lot of money. Mr. Blackwell, Noah replied. Howard hesitated. He capped the pen. He looked at the door. For a second, I thought he might walk out. I thought he might actually have a shred of survival instinct left. Noah checked his watch. It was a calculated gesture. I should mention, Noah said, his voice dropping a tone, making it sound like a secret between friends. The wire transfer is queued with our custodian bank. The disbursement window for this quarter's fund closes at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. That is 12 minutes from now. If we miss the window, I have to resubmit the proposal to the investment committee next week. Next week, Howard's voice cracked. Howard couldn't wait until next week. Payroll was tomorrow. The repo man for the Bentley was coming on Saturday. The fear of the immediate loss outweighed the fear of the future consequence. It is the flaw of every gambler. They always think they can fix it before the card turns. Howard uncapped the pen again. He didn't look at the text anymore. He looked at the signature line. Fine, Howard said. Let's get this over with. I have a dinner reservation. He pressed the nib of the pen to the paper. The scratching sound was loud in the silent room. He signed his name with a flourish. Howard Blackwell. He dated it. He pushed the binder toward Trent. Witness it. He commanded. Trent looked at the page. He looked at the clause that said, "Witness verifies the identity of the signer and the accuracy of the representation." Trent knew it was a lie, but Trent wanted his job. Trent wanted to be near the power, even if the power was rotting from the inside out. Trent took the pen. He signed his name below Howard's. It was done. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, in that binder. Sandwiched between legal jargon and financial tables, was the end of my father's life as he knew it. He had just sworn under oath that he owned assets he didn't have. He had just handed me the legal right to demand $12 million the moment I walked into the room, and he had done it to save a car. Noah took the binder back. He checked the signatures. He nodded. "Perfect," Noah said. He closed the binder. The snap of the rings closing sounded like a gunshot. "I will initiate the wire," Noah said. "You should see the funds in your operating account within the hour." Howard stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked relieved. He looked like a man who had just dodged a bullet, unaware that he had actually just swallowed poison. "Pleasure doing business with you." "Noah," Howard said, extending his hand again, "you tell your partners at Northbridge they made a smart bet. Blackwell Crown is going to turn that dirt into gold. I am sure they will be very interested to hear that." Noah said. Howard turned to Trent. "Grab the briefcase. Let's go. I need a drink." They turned toward the door. I stood up in the dark room. I smoothed the front of my skirt. I adjusted my blazer. I walked to the connecting door. I unlocked it. The click of the lock was loud. Howard stopped. He turned around, frowning. He thought it was a service entrance, maybe a waiter bringing champagne. The door swung open. I stepped into the light of the suite. I wasn't wearing the thrift store coat anymore. I was wearing a suit that cost more than Trent made in a month. My face was calm. My eyes were dry. Howard blinked. He looked at me, his brain refusing to process the image. He saw a woman who looked like his daughter. But the context was wrong. His daughter was a failure. His daughter was a liability. This woman looked like a shark, Mackenzie Trent whispered, the briefcase slipping from his hand and hitting the floor with a crash. Howard squinted. "What are you doing here? How did you get in here?" He looked at Noah, then back at me, waiting for security to come and remove the intruder. But Noah didn't move. Noah didn't call security. Noah stepped to the side, standing just behind my right shoulder, the position of a subordinate. "Hello, Dad," I said. The word hung in the air, stripped of all affection. Howard looked from me to Noah, and then to the binder on the table. The gears were turning slowly, grinding against the rust of his arrogance. You know him," Howard stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Noah. "I hired him," I said. Howard laughed. It was a nervous, incredulous bark. "You hired him. You don't have 2 nickels to rub together. What is this? Is this some kind of prank? Did you sleep with him to get in here?" I walked to the table. I picked up the binder. I opened it to the page he had just signed. The ink was still wet. "Northbridge Portfolio is a wholly owned subsidiary of Blackstone Meridian Recovery," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And I am the CEO of Blackstone Meridian." I turned the binder around so he could see his own signature. "I didn't sleep with him. Howard, I bought him. Just like I bought this debt. Just like I bought you." Howard's face went pale, a sickly gray color that clashed with his expensive tan. He looked at the document, then at me. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible. You are a liability. Not anymore." I said, "Now, I am the chairman of the board, and we need to discuss the audit." I looked at Noah. "Execute the acceleration clause," I said. Noah pulled his phone out. "Done." I looked back at my father. The trap had snapped shut, and he was finally, truly, listening. The silence in the presidential suite was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and pressurized. It felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room, replaced by a vacuum that pulled at the eardrums. I stood there in my charcoal gray suit, a garment that was tailored to within a millimeter of perfection, looking nothing like the girl in the thrift store coat who had shivered in the snow 7 years ago. Howard Blackwell stared at me. His mouth hung slightly open, a violation of his composed public image that he would have hated if he were self-aware enough to notice it. He looked at the binder. He looked at me. He looked at Noah. The triangle of power had shifted so violently that he was struggling to find his footing. "You?" Howard managed to say. The word came out as a croak. I did not smile. This was not a moment for gloating. Gloating is for people who are surprised they won. I was not surprised. "Hello, Howard," I repeated. I did not call him Dad. That title had been revoked the night he chose his credit rating over my survival. He blinked, shaking his head as if trying to clear a hallucination. He looked at the contract he had just signed, the ink still glistening under the chandelier lights. He forced a laugh, but it sounded like dry leaves being crushed. "Okay," he said, straightening his tie with a jerky motion. "Okay, so you did well for yourself. You started a company. That is good. Mackenzie, I always said you had potential if you just applied yourself." He was rewriting history in real time. He was trying to find a narrative where my success was somehow his doing. "But business is business," Howard continued, his voice gaining a little more strength. "You bought the debt. Fine. You are the lender now. That changes nothing about the paper I just signed." He tapped the leather binder with a confident finger. "I have 18 months. Mackenzie. That is what the contract says. 18 months of forbearance, an immediate infusion of $500,000. You cannot touch me. You cannot foreclose. I have a legally binding agreement that gives me time." He looked at me with a smirk that was trying to be patronizing, but failed to hide the fear in his eyes. "You might be the CEO, honey, but you are still amateur. You signed the deal. You are locked in." I walked slowly toward the table. I moved with the unhurried grace of someone who owns the building, the furniture, and the oxygen. I stopped right next to him. I could smell his cologne. It was the same scent he had worn the night he kicked me out. Cedar and denial. I reached out and placed my index finger on the open binder. I did not tap it. I simply rested my finger on the appendix he had just signed. "You are halfway right. Howard," I said softly, "you did sign a contract, and that contract does offer 18 months of forbearance." I paused, letting him think he had won a small victory. "However," I continued, my voice hardening into steel, "that forbearance is conditional. It is contingent on the truthfulness of the borrower." I looked at Noah. "Show him," I commanded. Noah stepped forward. He did not look at Howard with pity. He looked at him with the clinical detachment of a coroner. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of high-resolution photographs. He fanned them out on the table, covering the signature page. Howard looked down, his face drained of all color. The photographs were dated 3 days ago. They showed a large equipment yard in Salt Lake City. In the center of the frame were 4 yellow Caterpillar excavators. The lighting was harsh, illuminating the serial numbers stenciled on the side of the machines. Noah pointed to the first photo. Caterpillar 336. Excavator. Noah read from a manifest. Serial number ending in 559. He pointed to the affidavit of accuracy that Howard had just signed. Listed here, in Schedule A, as currently located at the West River job site and free of liens. Noah said. Noah pointed to the second photo. Komatsu D61 bulldozer, serial number ending in 420, listed here as active collateral. Noah looked up, his eyes locking onto Howard's. "We ran a lien search this morning. Mr. Blackwell. These machines were repossessed by Western Equipment Leasing 28 days ago for non-payment. They are currently sitting in an auction lot in Utah. They are not on your site. They are not yours to pledge." Howard stared at the photos. His hands started to shake uncontrollably. He gripped the edge of the table to steady them. "I can explain." Howard stammered. "It is a mix-up. A clerical error. The leasing company made a mistake. I was going to get them back next week with the funds from this loan. It was a temporary displacement. I leaned in close. It is not a clerical error. Howard, I said, it is perjury. I tapped the affidavit again. You just swore, under penalty of law, that you possessed these assets. You swore they were unencumbered. You lied. To a federally regulated financial institution. I am not a bank. Howard shouted, spit flying from his lips. You are just a shell company. You are my daughter. I am Northbridge Portfolio. I corrected him cold and sharp. And Northbridge Portfolio does not tolerate fraud. I looked at Noah. What happens when a borrower provides a materially false statement on an affidavit of accuracy, I asked. Though I knew the answer, Noah recited the clause from memory. It triggers the acceleration clause immediately. Noah said, the lender reserves the right to declare the entire principal balance, plus all accrued interest and penalties, due and payable instantly. The forbearance period is void from the start, from the beginning. Noah pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen once. It is done. Noah said, I just filed the notice of default and acceleration with the county clerk electronically. Howard looked around the room as if searching for an exit, but the walls were closing in. What does that mean? Howard whispered. It means, I said, that you do not have 18 months. You do not have 18 days. You do not even have 18 seconds. I checked my watch. You owe me $12,400,082, and I'm demanding payment in full, right now. Howard laughed again. A hysterical, high-pitched sound. I don't have $12 million. You know I don't. That is why I'm here. I know, I said calmly. That is why we moved to the next step. Noah held up his phone again. When the acceleration clause is triggered by fraud, it grants us an automatic writ of attachment. Noah explained. 5 minutes ago, while you were reading the contract, our back office submitted the court order to your primary banking institutions, as if on cue. Howard's phone buzzed in his pocket. Then Trent's phone buzzed. Then the tablet in Trent's briefcase chimed. Howard pulled his phone out. He stared at the screen. A notification from his bank. Alert account frozen. Court order 77,942. He swiped to his business account. Frozen. He swiped to his personal savings. Frozen. You froze my money. Howard gasped. He looked at me with pure horror. You cannot do that. I have payroll tomorrow. I have vendors. I have a life. You have a debt, I said. And until that debt is satisfied, every dollar you own belongs to me. Trent Vale suddenly slammed his hands on the table. He stood up, his face red and sweaty. This is illegal, Trent shouted. He pointed a shaking finger at me. This is entrapment. You set us up. You knew the machines were gone. You let him sign it just so you could trap him. No judge will uphold this. We will sue you. We will sue you for bad faith lending. I turned my gaze to Trent. I did not raise my voice. I did not look angry. I looked at him with the indifference of a statue. Sit down. Trent, I said. I am not sitting down. Trent yelled. He looked at Howard, trying to rally him. Howard, we can fight this. She trapped us. This is predatory. I walked around the table until I was standing directly in front of Trent. He was the father of my child, and yet he was a stranger. Predatory, I asked. I picked up the affidavit. I pointed to the second signature at the bottom, the one that was still wet. You signed as a witness. Trent, I said, you certified that you verified the assets. You are the project manager. You knew those machines were in Utah. You signed a legal document verifying a lie. I dropped the paper back onto the table. That makes you a co-conspirator in wire fraud. I said. Trent's mouth snapped shut. The blood drained from his face. I am not suing you. Trent, I continued, I am not calling the police, not yet. But in the world of high finance, a signature is the only currency that matters, and you just spent yours on a lie. If you try to fight me in court, I will present this document to the district attorney. You won't just lose your job, you will go to prison. Trent sank back into his chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. He realized that the trap was not just for Howard. It was for anyone who stood in the way. Howard was breathing heavily. He was clutching his chest, not from a heart attack, but from the crushing weight of reality. He looked at the frozen notifications on his phone. He looked at the pictures of the missing bulldozers. He looked at me. His eyes changed. The anger faded, replaced by a desperate, manipulative softness. He was playing his last card. "Mackenzie," Howard said, his voice trembling. "Please." He walked around the table, reaching out as if to touch my arm. I took a step back, keeping the distance between us absolute. "Mackenzie, look at me," he pleaded. "I am your father. I am the man who raised you. We had good times, didn't we? Remember the pony I bought you when you were 10? Remember the trips to the lake?" I stared at him. I remembered the pony. I also remembered him selling it 6 months later to cover a gambling debt. "We can work this out," Howard said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Just us. Family. Send the lawyer away. Let's sit down and talk. I can make you a partner, a real partner. We can run the company together, Blackwell and daughter. It has a ring to it, doesn't it?" He tried to smile. It was a grotesque, desperate expression. "You don't want to ruin your old dad, do you?" Howard asked. "Think about the family name. Think about your daughter. Harlow. Right? That is her name. I want to meet her. I want to be a grandfather." The mention of Harlow turned the air around me into ice. I looked at Noah. "Leave us," I said. Noah nodded. He stepped out of the room, closing the heavy door behind him. Howard let out a long sigh of relief. He thought he had cracked the armor. He thought that because I was a woman, because I was his daughter, emotion would override logic. He thought he could manipulate his way out of the noose. He smiled, a confident, oily smile. "There," he said. "Now we can talk. Look, Kenzie, I know you are angry. You have every right to be. I was tough on you, maybe too tough. But it made you strong, didn't it? Look at you now, a CEO. I did that. I pushed you to greatness. I watched him spin his web. It was pathetic." "Howard," I said. "Yes, sweetheart," he asked, stepping closer. "I didn't send the lawyer away because I wanted to negotiate. I sent him away because I didn't want him to see you beg." Howard stopped. His smile faltered. "I am not begging," he said, his voice tightening. "I am offering you a deal. Unfreeze the accounts. Tear up this restructuring agreement. Let me breathe. And I will put you in the will. I will give you 20% of the company." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. 20% of 0 is 0. "Howard," I said, "your company is insolvent. Your assets are gone. You have nothing to give me." I walked over to the window, looking out at the city. "You asked about Harlow," I said, keeping my back to him. "You asked to be a grandfather?" "Yes," Howard said eagerly. "I want to know her." 7 years ago," I said, turning to face him, "I stood in your dining room. I was 22. I was scared. And I was carrying her. And you didn't see a grandchild. You saw a liability. I'm sorry about that." Howard said quickly. "I was stressed. The market was down. You called me a bad investment." I continued, ignoring his excuse. "You threw me out into a blizzard. Do you know where I slept that night? I assumed you went to a hotel." Howard said, "I slept in my car." I said, "For 3 weeks, I washed my face in gas station sinks. I ate peanut butter from a jar because I couldn't afford bread. And all that time, while I was freezing, you were living in that house, using my credit score to float your loans." I took a step closer to him. "You stole my identity. Howard, you forged my signature. You took out loans in my name and defaulted on them. You destroyed my credit before I even had a chance to build it. You sold my name to pay your debts. That was business." Howard shouted, his facade cracking again. It was survival. "I did what I had to do to keep the roof over our heads, and now I am doing what I have to do," I said calmly. I walked back to the table and picked up the binder. "I am not vindictive. Howard, I am just a debt buyer, and I have acquired a distressed asset. I looked him in the eye. You sold my name to strangers to save yourself. So I went out and I found every single stranger you owed money to. I bought the notes. I bought the liens. I bought the judgments. I held up the binder. I bought back exactly what you pawned. I said, I bought back my name, and now I own yours. Howard stared at me. He realized, finally, that there was no deal to be made. There was no family reunion. This was a liquidation. What are you going to do? He whispered. I am going to enforce the contract. I said. I pressed the intercom button on the table. Noah, you can come back in. The door opened and Noah returned. Proceed with the asset seizure. I told Noah, send the notification to the sheriff regarding the Bentley and the Aspen property, and inform the site foreman that Blackwell Crown Development is under new management effective immediately. Howard sank into a chair. He looked old. He looked broken. You can't do this, he mumbled. People will talk. The scandal, let them talk. I said. I turned to leave. I walked to the door, my heels clicking on the floor. I stopped and looked back at him one last time. You were right about one thing. Dad, I said. He looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. What he asked. I am a liability. I said. I opened the door. But you forgot the most important rule of finance. I added. What rule? A liability always has an owner. I said. And now, I own you. I walked out of the suite, leaving him in the silence of his own ruin. The air in the hallway was cool and fresh. I took a deep breath. It tasted like winter. It tasted like justice. The air in the room had shifted from the heavy pressure of financial ruin to something sharper, more volatile, and infinitely more dangerous. I had my hand on the door handle, ready to walk out into the hallway as the victor. I had the debt. I had the judgment. I had the satisfaction of seeing my father reduced to a man begging for a percentage of his own company. But I should have known that a wounded animal does not just lie down and die, it bites. Wait, Trent Vale said. His voice was not loud, but it had a strange, resonant quality that stopped me. It was not the voice of the terrified employee who had just signed a fraudulent affidavit. It was the voice of a man who believed he was holding a grenade and was ready to pull the pin. I stopped. I did not turn around immediately. I looked at the wood grain of the door, taking a slow breath. We are done here. Trent, I said, keeping my back to him, you can speak to the sheriff when he arrives to inventory the assets. No, Trent said, the sound of a zipper on a briefcase cutting through the silence. We are not done, not even close. I heard paper sliding across the table. You took the company. Mackenzie, Trent said. You took the money. You took the legacy. But you forgot one thing. You forgot that in the eyes of the state of Colorado, I am still a father. I turned around slowly. Trent was standing by the table. He was no longer slumped in defeat. He was standing straight, holding a stack of documents stapled in blue legal backing. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and adrenaline, the look of a gambler pushing his last chip into the center of the pot. Howard was sitting in the chair, watching Trent with a sudden, dawning interest. The despair in his eyes was being replaced by a malicious glimmer. He realized that the war had just changed fronts. What is that? I asked. Looking at the blue packet, Trent slapped the documents down on the mahogany table. This, Trent said, is a petition for an emergency ex parte order for temporary custody. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a physical blow, harder than any financial loss could ever be. I kept my face frozen, but my blood ran cold. Custody of whom, I asked. Though I knew. Custody of Harlow. Trent said. He said her name with a possessiveness that made my skin crawl. I walked back to the table. I picked up the document. I read the header. In the matter of the custody of Harlow Black, Petitioner Trent Vale, Respondent Mackenzie Black. I scanned the allegations. They were ugly. They were twisted. They were designed to paint a picture of a woman who was unhinged. The respondent has a history of instability and ran away from home at 22. The respondent has no fixed address and lived in a vehicle for an extended period. The respondent has exhibited erratic behavior and harbors a vendetta against the child's grandfather, creating a toxic environment. The respondent is a flight risk. I looked up at Trent. You filed this? We filed it this morning, Trent said, crossing his arms. Before we came here, we knew you were up to something. Mackenzie, we didn't know you were the buyer, but we knew someone was coming for the company. We needed insurance. Howard stood up. He walked over to stand next to Trent. The power dynamic in the room flipped again. Howard wasn't the broke businessman anymore. He was the patriarch protecting his bloodline from a madwoman. You see, Mackenzie, Howard said, his voice dripping with false concern. We are worried about you. You disappear for 7 years. You come back with a fake company and a plan to destroy your own family. That does not sound like the behavior of a stable mother. That sounds like obsession. That sounds like mental illness. He leaned against the table, a cruel smile playing on his lips. A judge will look at this. Howard continued. He will see a woman who is homeless. He will see a woman who is driven by revenge, and he will see a loving father and a grandfather who have a stable home in Briar Ridge, ready to take the child in. You don't even know her, I said, my voice shaking slightly despite my best efforts. You didn't ask about her for 7 years. You called her a liability. That was before. Howard waved his hand dismissively. Now she is family, and we protect family. He looked at me with eyes that were black and empty. Unless, of course, we can come to an arrangement. I looked from Howard to Trent. They were using my daughter as a bargaining chip. They were trading her safety for their bank accounts. What do you want? I asked. Howard straightened his jacket. It is simple, he said. You rescind the acceleration notice. You unfreeze the accounts. You sign a release of judgment. You hand the debt back to us for, let's say, 10 cents on the dollar, a write-off. And if I don't, I asked. Then Trent walks out of here and drives straight to the courthouse to file this. Howard said, We get the emergency order. The police come to your penthouse tonight. They take Harlow. She stays with us until the hearing, which could be months away. Do you want your daughter watching her mother get dragged out of the lobby by CPS? I looked at Trent. He avoided my eyes. He was doing this for money. He was doing this because Howard had promised him a promotion, a bonus, a slice of the pie. He was selling his own child to save his boss. I felt a wave of nausea, but I pushed it down. Panic is a luxury I could not afford. I had to think. I had to look at the board and find the weakness. I looked at the document again. It was drafted by a law firm I recognized. Holloway Associates. They were expensive. They were sharks. They didn't do work for free. I looked at Noah. He was standing by the window, watching the exchange with his usual stoic expression. But I saw a flicker of intensity in his eyes. He was waiting for my command. I turned back to Trent. You hired Holloway Associates. I said, They require a $25,000 retainer just to open a file. Trent puffed out his chest. That is right. We hired the best. We aren't playing around. Mackenzie, I looked at Howard. And I assume you paid for it, I asked. Since Trent here is on a mid-level manager's salary and is currently renting a 1-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, Howard shrugged. I support my employees, especially when they are family. I wired the retainer this morning. I nodded slowly. You wired it. I repeated. From which account? Howard frowned. He didn't like the specific nature of the question. From my personal checking at First Century. He said, Why does it matter? The money is gone. The lawyers are paid. The suit is live. I looked at Noah. Noah, what time exactly did you file the notice of default and the writ of attachment? Noah looked at his phone, scrolling back through the log. The electronic filing was accepted at 10:14 in the morning. Noah said, The automatic freeze on all accounts associated with Mr. Blackwell's social security number was instantaneous. The bank servers confirmed the lock at 10:15. I turned back to Howard. I checked the time on the wall clock. It was now 11:30. And what time did you send the wire? Howard, I asked. Howard blinked. He looked confused. I sent it, I don't know, around 10:30, right before we came into the room. I set it up on the app in the car. I smiled. It was a cold, razor-sharp smile. Then the lawyers aren't paid. I said, What Trent asked. I looked at Trent. The wire didn't go through. Trent, Howard's accounts were frozen at 10:15. Any transaction attempted after that time would be flagged and rejected by the bank's compliance software. The money never left First Sentry. Trent looked at Howard in panic. You said it was handled. You showed me the confirmation screen. I showed you the submitted screen, Howard shouted, his face turning red. It takes an hour to process. I walked over to the table and picked up the blue packet. Holloway Associates is a business. Trent, I said, they don't file motions on credit. If the retainer didn't clear, they aren't going to court for you. They probably already sent you an email telling you the representation is suspended. Trent fumbled for his phone. He swiped frantically. He stopped. His face went gray. I leaned in close to him. You are threatening to take my child, I said, my voice low and dangerous. But you are trying to do it with a bounced check. Howard slammed his hand on the table. We will find the money, he roared. I have friends, I have cash stashed in the safe at the house. We will pay them in cash. You think a technicality is going to stop me, I will ruin you. Mackenzie, I will paint you as a lunatic. I will drag your name through the mud until you beg me to stop. He was frothing at the mouth. Desperate and vicious. He didn't care about Harlow. He just wanted to hurt me. I looked at him with pity. He really didn't understand who he was dealing with. He thought I was playing checkers. You are right. Howard, I said, a custody battle is ugly. It relies on character witnesses and stability. I walked over to my own briefcase, which had been sitting on the sideboard. I opened it. I pulled out a thick binder of my own. It wasn't blue. It was black. I placed it on the table. So, let's talk about stability, I said. I opened the binder. This is a retained counsel agreement with Whitman Sterling, the top family law firm in Chicago. I said, I paid their retainer 6 months ago. $50,000. Cleared. I turned the page. This is a sworn affidavit from the headmistress of the St. Jude Academy, where Harlow has been enrolled for 2 years. It details her perfect attendance, her high grades, and my active participation in the Parent-Teacher Association. I turned the page again. This is a letter from her pediatrician, confirming she is in excellent health and up to date on all vaccinations. This is a copy of the lease on my penthouse, fully paid for the next 2 years. This is a statement of my personal assets, separate from the company, showing a liquidity of $3 million set aside in a trust specifically for her education. I looked up at Trent. And this, I said, pointing to the last tab, this is a dossier on you. Trent swallowed hard. Me. It details your 3 arrests for driving under the influence in college. I said, it details your gambling debts on sports betting apps. And it contains a transcript of a conversation you had with a coworker last week where you referred to Harlow as the ticket to the big office. I closed the binder. You walked in here with a draft motion and a bounced check. I said, I walked in here with a fortress. I looked at Howard. You want to go to court, I asked. Let's go. My lawyer is already on standby. I will file for full legal and physical custody, and I will petition to terminate your parental rights based on the fraud you just committed in this room. I will play the recording of you offering to trade your granddaughter for debt relief. I pointed to the camera lens in the corner of the ceiling. It recorded audio. Howard, a family court judge will love hearing you bargain with a child's life like she is a piece of used equipment. Howard looked at the camera. He looked at the binder. He realized, finally, that he had no ammunition left. The gun he tried to point at me was empty. Trent looked at me. His eyes were wet. He was not a monster like Howard. He was just a weak man who had been bullied into a corner. I didn't want to do it. Mackenzie, Trent whispered. He made me. He said it was the only way to save the job. I didn't answer him. I didn't care about his excuses. I looked at Noah. Is the sheriff en route, I asked. E.T., 10 minutes, Noah said. I looked at Howard. You have 10 minutes to leave this building. I said, if you are still here when the deputies arrive, I will have you arrested for trespassing on Northbridge Portfolio property. Howard stared at me. He opened his mouth to speak, to curse, to beg, but nothing came out. He grabbed his coat. He didn't look at Trent. He didn't look at the view. He walked to the door, a man who had lost his fortune, his family, and his pride in the span of 1 hour. He slammed the door behind him. I was left with Trent. Trent looked at the blue documents on the table. He reached out and slowly pulled them back. "I will withdraw the petition," Trent said quietly. "You don't have to," I said. "It was never filed because you couldn't pay the fee." Trent flinched. "Can I see her?" Trent asked. Someday I looked at him. I saw the man I used to love, buried under layers of weakness and compromise. "Get a job." "Trent," I said, "a real job, not working for a fraud. Get an apartment that you pay for yourself. Get sober. Get clean." I walked to the door, and then, "Maybe. We can talk about a supervised visit, but if you ever try to use her as leverage again, I won't just buy your debt. I will destroy your future." I walked out of the room. Noah followed me. "That was close," Noah said as we walked down the hallway. "If that wire had cleared, it wouldn't have mattered," I said, staring straight ahead. "Why?" Noah asked. "Because I bought the law firm too," I said. Noah stopped walking. He looked at me, stunned. "You bought Holloway Associates." "I bought the building they lease," I said, pressing the elevator button, "and I am their biggest client for corporate litigation. They would never have filed that motion against me. They just took Trent's call to bill him for the consultation." The elevator doors opened. I stepped in. "I told you, Noah," I said as the doors closed. "I don't leave anything to chance, not when it comes to her." My name is Mackenzie Black, and I was walking toward the elevator with the steady rhythm of a woman who had just closed the deal of a lifetime. Noah was a step behind me. I felt the adrenaline beginning to fade, replaced by a dull, throbbing exhaustion. I just wanted to go home, take off this armor of a suit, and hug my daughter, but the elevator doors did not open. Instead, I heard a shout from behind me. "You are not going anywhere." I turned around. Howard Blackwell was standing there. He had not left the building. He was pacing frantically in the hallway, his face a mask of purple rage. He was holding his phone out in front of him like a weapon. The speakerphone toggled on at maximum volume. "I have Grant on the line," Howard screamed, waving the device at me. I told him everything. "He is filing an emergency injunction right now. He is going to get a judge to overturn your little hostile takeover before you even get to the lobby. You think you can outsmart a law firm with 50 years of history?" He shoved the phone toward my face. "Tell her," Grant Howard yelled at the device. "Tell her what happens when you mess with Blackwell Crown." I expected to hear Grant Sutter's smooth, arrogant baritone delivering a legal threat. I expected a citation of statutes and a promise of litigation. Hell! Instead, I heard panic. "Howard!" "Shut up." Grant's voice crackled through the speaker, high-pitched and breathless. "I cannot file an injunction. I cannot file a lunch order. My credit line is dead." Howard froze. The triumphant sneer slid off his face. "What? My cards are declined." Howard Grant shouted. "My operating line with Lex Capital just got called. They froze the firm's payroll account 10 minutes ago. They are demanding immediate repayment of the expansion loan, $300,000. Today if I don't pay it by close of business. They report me to the Bar Association for insolvency. I lose my license." "Howard," I stepped forward. I looked at the phone in Howard's hand. I looked at Howard, and then I leaned in close to the microphone. "Hello? Grant?" I said. My voice was calm, contrasting sharply with the hysteria coming from the device. There was a silence on the other end, a terrified pause. "Who is that?" Grant asked. "Is that Mackenzie?" "It is," I said, "and I think there is a misunderstanding. Lex Capital didn't call your loan." "What do you mean?" Grant asked. "I have the notice right here. Lex Capital sold your loan." I said, 3 days ago. "To a private distress fund called Obsidian Creek." I paused to let the name sink in. "I am Obsidian Creek. Grant," I said. Howard gasped. He looked at the phone, then at me, as if the device had suddenly turned into a snake. "You," Howard stammered, "you bought his debt too. I bought the debt of anyone who could help you hurt me." I said to Howard, then turned my focus back to the speaker. "So, Grant, here is the situation. I own your expansion loan. It is in default due to missed payments. I have the right to petition for the involuntary bankruptcy of Sutter and Associates immediately. Mackenzie. Wait. Grant's voice shifted instantly from anger to begging. Please. This is my firm. This is my life. We can work this out. I can pay you. I just need time. I don't want your money. Grant. I said, I want your client. That is coercion, Howard screamed. He tried to pull the phone away, but I grabbed his wrist. I held the phone steady. This is illegal. You are forcing him. It is not coercion. Howard, I said coldly, it is the market. You signed the papers to get the cash. Grant borrowed money to build his office. You both took the risk. Now I am calling the bet. I spoke clearly into the phone. Grant, listen to me very carefully. I am willing to offer you a forbearance agreement. I will unfreeze your operating account. I will give you 12 months to pay off the principal interest-free. I will save your firm. I will do anything. Grant said, Name it. You resign as counsel for Howard Blackwell effective immediately. I said, and you provide me with the original files regarding the corporate secretary resolution from 7 years ago. Howard went pale. No, he whispered. Grant, you can't. Attorney-client privilege. You will be disbarred. Privilege does not apply to the commission of a crime. Howard, I said, my eyes locked on his. It is called the crime-fraud exception. If a client uses an attorney to facilitate fraud, the privilege is void. I turned back to the phone. I know Howard asked you to backdate that resolution. Grant, I know he asked you to make it look like I was an officer of the company so he could forge my signature on the bank loans. I know you drafted the minutes for a meeting that never happened. Grant hesitated. Mackenzie, if I admit that, I implicate myself. If you don't admit it, I said, I bankrupt you by 5 o'clock today, and then I subpoena your files anyway during the liquidation. You go down either way. Grant, but if you help me now, you keep your license, you keep your firm, you just lose one toxic client. Grant, Howard shouted. Don't you dare, I paid you, I made you. You didn't pay me, Grant yelled back, his voice cracking. Your retainer bounced, Mackenzie told me. You haven't paid me in 6 months. Howard, you have been stringing me along just like everyone else. The hallway was silent for a heartbeat. Howard looked like he had been slapped. The loyalty he thought he had purchased was revealed to be just another unpaid invoice. I have the emails, Grant said quietly. What Howard whispered. I have the emails, Grant repeated, his voice gaining strength. From 7 years ago, you sent me the instruction. You wrote, and I quote, Make it look legal. She is just a kid. She won't know the difference. Put her name on the secretary line so the bank stops asking questions. I saved it. Howard, I saved it because I knew one day you would try to blame me. Send them to me. I ordered. Right now. Forward the entire chain to Noah Kincaid. And the draft documents with your handwritten edits. Done, Grant said. I am sending them now. Are we good? Mackenzie, is the debt hold released once the email lands? I said, You have 1 minute. I released Howard's wrist. He lowered the phone slowly. He looked defeated. He looked hollow. The legal wall he had hidden behind for 7 years had just crumbled because his lawyer had a mortgage to pay. But I wasn't done. I looked over Howard's shoulder. Trent Vale was standing in the doorway of the suite, watching us. He had heard everything. He looked sick. Grant, I said into the phone, keeping my eyes on Trent. One more thing. Who delivered the physical documents to Howard for signature who brought the forgery to the house? It was Trent, Grant said without hesitation. Trent Vale picked up the packet from my office. He knew what was in it. He asked me if it was going to be a problem that you weren't there to sign it personally. I told him to just get it done. He took the packet to Howard. I hung up the phone. I walked over to Trent. He backed away until he hit the doorframe. You knew. I said, I was just an intern back then. Trent stammered. I didn't understand the law. You understood enough to trade it for a promotion. I said, Grant just confirmed you were the courier. You weren't just a bystander. Trent, you were the bagman. My phone chimed. Noah looked at his screen. We have it, Noah said. Subject line, Solution for West River Financing. The attachment is the backdated corporate resolution, and the body of the email from Howard gives explicit instruction to fabricate Mackenzie's consent. Noah looked up at Howard. This is a smoking gun. Mr. Blackwell, this proves intent to defraud a financial institution, identity theft, and conspiracy, and since you used email, it is also wire fraud. Federal charges. Howard slumped against the wall. He slid down until he was crouching on the floor, his expensive suit bunching up around his knees. He put his head in his hands. Why? Howard moaned. Why are you doing this? I am your father. No, I said, looking down at him. You are a debtor, and I am just collecting. I turned to Noah. Send a copy of those emails to the district attorney's office, I said, and attach them to the civil complaint. Wait, Trent shouted. He ran forward and grabbed my arm. Mackenzie, please, if you send that to the DA, I get dragged in too. I was the courier. I will lose everything. I will lose my chance to see Harlow. I pulled my arm away. I looked at Trent with a mixture of disgust and finality. You lost your chance to see Harlow when you tried to leverage her for a paycheck, I said. I looked at Howard, huddled on the floor, and then at Trent, shaking with fear. They were the two men who were supposed to protect me, my father and my lover, and they had both sold me out for a few $1,000s and a quiet life. Grant Sutter just saved himself because he understood the value of the truth. I said, You two, you are bankrupt in every way that matters. I pressed the elevator button again. The doors opened immediately this time. Come on, Noah, I said. We have a press release to draft. What press release? Howard asked, looking up with tear-filled eyes. The one announcing that Blackwell Crown Development has entered receivership, I said, and that the new management is conducting a forensic audit of all past criminal activity. I stepped into the elevator. You wanted a legacy. Dad, I said as the doors started to close. Now you have one. You are going to be the example they teach in law school of what happens when you underestimate a liability. The doors shut, cutting off the sight of my father crying on the floor of the hallway. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I felt light. The weight I had carried for 7 years, the weight of his judgment and his lies, was finally gone. I looked at Noah. Did Grant actually send everything I asked? Everything, Noah said, tapping his phone, including a memo where Trent asks for a raise in exchange for keeping his mouth shut about the signature. I nodded. Good, I said. Then it is over. Not quite, Noah said gently. We still have to finish the cleanup. I know, I said. But the hard part is done. I bought the debt, I bought the lawyer, and I bought the truth. The elevator began its descent, taking me down to the street, down to the real world, where the snow was falling again. But this time, I wasn't walking out into it alone. I was walking out as the owner of the storm. The fallout of a nuclear explosion is silent. The blast is loud. Yes, but the radiation that follows the invisible force that strips the land bare and poisons the ground makes no sound at all. That is what happened in the days following the confrontation at the Ravenscourt Center. There was no more screaming. There were no more threats in hallways. There was only the quiet, terrifying efficiency of the law doing exactly what it was designed to do. Noah Kincaid walked into the office of the district attorney at 9 o'clock the next morning. He did not carry a weapon. He carried a flash drive and a sworn affidavit from Grant Sutter. The package was comprehensive. It contained the entire email chain where Howard Blackwell had explicitly instructed his attorney to fabricate a corporate resolution. It contained the draft documents with Grant's handwritten notes in the margins, asking how to make my signature look authentic. It contained the internal memos from Trent Vale, confirming he had delivered the fraudulent paperwork. It was not just evidence of a bad loan. It was a roadmap of a conspiracy. It was the kind of file that prosecutors dream of because it requires no investigation. The confession was in the metadata. By noon, the wheels of the civil and criminal justice systems began to turn in unison. The first domino to fall was the custody case, 2 days after the incident in the hotel suite. I stood in the hallway of the family court. I was wearing a cream-colored suit, projecting an image of calm, maternal stability. My lawyer, a senior partner from Whitman Sterling, stood beside me. Trent Vale arrived alone. He looked like a man who had not slept in 48 hours. His suit was wrinkled. His eyes were red. He kept looking toward the elevator, waiting for the high-priced legal team from Holloway Associates to arrive and save him. They never came. When the bailiff called our case, we walked into the courtroom. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked at the empty table beside Trent. "Mr. Vale," the judge said. "Where is your counsel?" Trent stood up, his hands shaking. "I don't know, Your Honor. They were supposed to be here. I paid the retainer." The judge looked at the file. "I have a notice of withdrawal here from Holloway Associates filed yesterday afternoon, citing non-payment of fees and a conflict of interest. You are representing yourself today." Trent looked at me. He looked at the judge. He looked like he wanted to vanish. "I guess so." Trent whispered. The hearing lasted less than 10 minutes. My lawyer presented the dossier I had prepared. The lease agreement, the school records, the affidavit from the pediatrician, the proof of the trust fund. We painted a picture of a life that was not only stable, but exemplary. Then, my lawyer presented the evidence of Trent's financial instability, the bounced retainer check, the gambling debts, and the copy of the affidavit he had signed as a witness to fraud just 2 days prior. The judge looked at Trent over her glasses. "Mr. Vale, you are petitioning for emergency custody based on allegations that the mother is unstable. Yet you are the one currently facing potential criminal liability for fraud, and you cannot even retain counsel. This petition is frivolous. It is dismissed with prejudice." The gavel banged. It sounded like a door slamming shut on Trent's leverage. Outside the courtroom, Trent tried to approach me. "Mackenzie?" "Wait," he said, reaching out. I stopped. I didn't flinch. "We can work something out." Trent pleaded. "I am her father. I have rights." "You have responsibilities." "Trent," I corrected him, "rights are earned. You tried to use her as a bargaining chip to save your job. You tried to trade her for a debt write-off. That is not what a father does. That is what a kidnapper does." I pulled a card from my purse. It was the number for a supervised visitation center. "If you want to see her, you go through the court-appointed mediator." I said, "You submit to drug testing. You prove you have a stable residence that you pay for yourself, and you never, ever talk to her about the business. If you mention money to her, if you mention Howard, if you mention the past, I will petition to strip your rights permanently." But Trent started. No negotiation. I said, "You wanted to play the legal game. This is the verdict." I walked away, leaving him standing alone in the corridor, realizing that he had sold his family for a promotion that no longer existed. The destruction of Howard Blackwell was more public and far more brutal. The acceleration clause I had triggered was absolute. The writ of attachment allowed Northbridge Portfolio to move immediately. We didn't just freeze the accounts. We seized the visible symbols of his success. On Friday afternoon, a flatbed tow truck rolled up to the front entrance of the Briar Ridge Country Club. Howard was inside, having lunch with the mayor, trying to pretend that the rumors swirling around town were just malicious gossip. He was holding court, laughing too loudly, trying to project the image of the untouchable tycoon. The valet interrupted him. "Mr. Blackwell," the valet said, his voice trembling. "There are some men outside. They are taking the Bentley." Howard stormed out, his napkin still tucked into his collar. He started screaming at the repo men. He threatened to sue them. He threatened to call the governor. But the men just showed him the court order signed by the judge. They hooked the car up, they dragged it onto the bed of the truck, and they drove away, leaving Howard standing on the curb, surrounded by the very people he had spent 7 years trying to impress. The illusion shattered. Everyone saw it. The whispers started instantly. "He is broke. It is all a sham. He is living on credit." The story of the country club king died on that curb. In its place, the truth emerged. Howard Blackwell was a man who had been living on borrowed time and a stolen name. back at the office of Blackwell Crown Development. The scene was forensic. A team of auditors from Blackstone Meridian took over the conference room. We went through every file. We found the double billing. We found the shell accounts. We found the invoices for materials that were never ordered. Grant Sutter, the lawyer, had saved himself. He signed a cooperation agreement with the state bar and the district attorney. He admitted to his role, surrendered his license for a 2-year suspension, and provided a full deposition detailing Howard's instructions. He threw Howard to the wolves to save his own skin. The legal wall that Howard had relied on the attorney-client privilege, the aggressive, threatening letters dissolved into mist. I requested a final meeting with Howard. I didn't do it at the country club or the hotel. I did it at the site of the West River Project. It was a gray afternoon. The wind was blowing across the empty lot, kicking up dust around the idle machines that hadn't been repossessed yet. Howard was sitting on a stack of lumber, looking out at the foundation of the building that would never be finished. He looked smaller. The arrogance that had fueled him for decades had evaporated. He wore a windbreaker, not a suit. He looked like an old man who had gotten lost on his way home. I walked up to him. My boots crunched on the gravel. He didn't look up. "They took the house this morning," Howard said quietly. "Marla left. She took the jewelry and went to her sister's in Phoenix. Said she couldn't live with a failure." I didn't feel pity. I felt the cold satisfaction of an equation balancing out. "You are not a failure because you lost the money, Howard." I said, "You are a failure because you stole from your own blood to keep it." He picked up a handful of gravel and let it slip through his fingers. "I built this company," he whispered. 40 years. You built a facade," I said. "And when it started to crack, you used me as spackle. You forged my name. You ruined my credit. You kicked a pregnant girl out into the snow because you were afraid I would expose you." He looked up at me then. His eyes were red-rimmed. I was scared. "Mackenzie," he admitted. For the first time, he sounded honest. "I was scared of being poor. I was scared of being nobody. And now you are both." I said. He let out a long, shuddering breath. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was barely a whisper. "You have the company. You have the assets. You have the lawyer. You won. What else do you want from me?" I looked at him, and I realized I didn't want his apology. His apology was worthless currency. It had no backing. "I want my name back." I said. I pulled a document from my bag. It was a release form. "I am using the proceeds from the liquidation of your assets to pay off the commercial loans you took out in my name." I said, "Every cent. I am clearing the credit report. I am expunging the defaults." I handed him a pen. "I want you to sign this admission of guilt." I said, "It states that you acted alone. It states that Mackenzie Black had no knowledge of the loans. It clears me of any liability. It makes my name clean on paper." Howard looked at the paper. He didn't argue. He didn't try to negotiate. He took the pen and signed it against his knee. He handed it back to me. "There," he said. "You are clean. I took the paper. I checked the signature. It was shaky, but it was valid. I am setting up a trust fund for Harlow with the remainder of the recovery." I said, "She will go to college. She will travel. She will have the start in life that you tried to steal from her. But she will never know you. You are not her grandfather. You are just a lesson she will learn about in history class." Howard nodded. He looked back out at the empty field. "I called you a liability," he murmured. "Yes," I said. I turned to walk away. The wind caught my hair. I felt light. I felt free. "You forgot one thing." "Howard," I said, stopping and looking back over my shoulder. What he asked. "A liability always has an owner." I said, "And you were right. I was a liability, but I bought the note. I became the owner. And then I wrote it off." I walked back to my car. The snow had stopped falling. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing a sliver of pale winter sun. I got into the driver's seat and started the engine. I didn't look back at the old man sitting on the lumber. I didn't look back at the sight of his failure. I put the car in drive. I had a daughter to pick up from school. I had a business to run. And for the first time in 7 years, when I looked in the rearview mirror, I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman who had paid her debts in full. I drove away, leaving the past in the dust, where it belonged. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and justice. I want to know, where in the world are you tuning in from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed watching Mackenzie turn the tables, please subscribe to Emma Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who need a little justice in their day. See you in the next story.